Hey, well, now I'm here with Shiva Rajaraman, who's the VP of Product and Engineering at Facebook. Hey, Shiva,
Hey, how you doing?
thank you for joining from your garage. Are you in
Yes,
Silicon Valley?
I am. I'm in the middle of the peninsula and like to use my garage as a little escape from the house. It's a nice illusion of walking to work. Hopefully, I'll be going to the office soon, but for now, this suffices and it's sort of fun.
I think that's so cool, right? Like Silicon Valley started in a garage, so I think it makes sense.
Totally. And it keeps it real too. When you got shovels and things, you can't get a big ego and it can't stay too abstract. And I think that's important.
So your LinkedIn profile is so impressive. I mean, I don't think I've met any other person with so many incredible logos on it. You worked at companies such as Google, Spotify, Apple, WeWork, and now Facebook. So why don't you tell us a little more about your product career?
Mm. Yeah. Maybe I can go back to the early days, which is I wouldn't say I knew, as we all know here, is product's still an emerging profession, I would say. I don't think it's something that's super well defined, but it's also evolving at a high speed. But if I go back in time, really, I started my background in kind of a research product project in the middle of Illinois. And to be honest, I was pretty much the worst researcher on the team. So they asked me effectively to take a lot of the computational power we had and some of the modeling stuff we were doing around proteins. And why don't you just put that on, a fairly new thing called the web and see if people could upload their own sequences and then we would magically transform them into 3D models. And at the time, computational resources were very slim and hard to get, but also the idea of, that being so transactional and simple through the web was fairly new. We take it for granted now. So basically, what I ended up doing was launching that, right, and working on those types of efforts. And that introduced me to what I would say was product. Okay. Now, fast forward a long time, I worked for various startups, often on the enterprise side, deep into analytics. I think that was really interesting for me too, because I would learn all these crazy business models, usually about incumbents. And then occasionally we'd have the opportunity to work with someone whose data was effectively that of a disruptor. So I got to see kind of like here's a P&L that's classical and the guardrails for major retailers, for example, or folks doing stuff in manufacturing. And then I'd also see kind of like the data models of someone who effectively was a complete disruptor in the space, approaching it very differently, maybe creating a better proposition entirely. And you could see these worlds collide. And so I really fell in love with that aspect of product, which I think thinking about the ecosystem and thinking a little bit about how incumbents get fixed in one way. With product design analytics, we can often disrupt that if we think in very different ways. And so that was very exciting. I ended up at YouTube, well, at Google first, and then the acquisition of YouTube happened a few weeks after I joined. And I raised my hand and said, this could be pretty fun. And I was working on video monetization, so probably better to do that with YouTube at the time than Google Video. So I jumped over. The next 8 years were glorious. I basically, some point in time, held any product role there was and gradually grew up as both a manager but also a leader of new initiatives, particularly the creator product organization that I really learned a lot of and carries through with me today. Fast forward again, I grew up in Texas. I moved to California. These are big states, okay? So you can go hours in these states with seeing exactly the same thing in many cases. So I had this itch to maybe live in a place that was more dense and very different. So fast forward about 6 months through some really awesome and fun recruiting from the Spotify team, I ended up moving out to Sweden and had a wonderful ride there as well. And very different from a big company, different set of product chops. Here's a company whose product is existential to the company, and you could see that kind of like, grit and scrappiness that's essential to make something work. While two of the biggest incumbents in the world are also launching music services. So really got into deep onto growth and differentiation, and also starting to think about ways to create engagement such that the more time you spend in a place, the more value it gives you, right? Which is very important. And at that time, I would say Spotify is more of a utility than a trusted, personalized service. So that was part of the journey there. Keep going further in time. I've usually just been excited about opportunities where you've got unfulfilled, supply and under, met demand. And YouTube was that, with creators now representing anyone in the world, being able to access anyone, particularly around a reflection perspective. Spotify also represented that for artists, being able to connect with their communities. And then I got excited. I had a little stint at Apple, but we can go into that later. But I generally had a great time. But I fell in love with WeWork, which was also about giving space to anyone and eventually services, so small businesses could get the value of a network and also achieve, hopefully, some wonderful outcomes as a result by not having to worry about all those commodity things. And most recently now at Facebook, we're working on commerce, and it's very exciting. But again, a very simple thing, which is we as a platform connect people with so much forms of engagement and discovery today. Can we also be the home for businesses to make that connection, more satisfying, right? Have longer term relationships and ultimately introduce people to products they love, often from businesses they've never heard about. And that becomes an exciting play.
I can see a pattern here because you're talking about platforms that are trying to connect supply and demand different ways, right? It
Yeah.
could be creators, consumers, could be people who are looking for space and people who have space, and
Yeah.
commerce buyers and sellers. As a product person who hasn't been, let's say, who is not a real estate broker, who is not like a music creator, like,
Right.
how do you learn enough to be dangerous and be able to join this type of, like, tackle this type of problems without really
Yeah.
being an absolute subject matter expert?
I think sometimes part of this is like going deep, talking to people and seeing what problems they have, and not necessarily through their word of mouth, but just asking them, hey, you've created a new song. What do you do next? It seems like you've got some traction with your YouTube video. You got some fans. Maybe you did an awesome cover song. What do you do next, right? And by understanding a little bit how difficult it is occasionally to do something next, right? And or how ambiguous it is, sometimes your product hat turns on. And you're like, well, I have a solution for that that can make it better, right? I have a solution that can get rid of pain in the system and make it easier for these people, if they're creative, to at least have a shot at an outcome. And then what you start to realize is that, well, the reason they can't is that there might be rails in front of them, right? True, hard things to surmount. So one thing that was very important at YouTube was to remove the gatekeeper equation, right? Having a gatekeeper first select you before you're eligible. Well, that means that gatekeeper either has to, have a crystal ball that they're really, really confident in, or they are going to resort to their own bias, right? And that's a problem. So removing the gatekeepers and having public currency was big in the YouTube world. Let's keep going down that line, even to the world we're in right now. Well, why are artists all about the Web3 economy and creating NFTs? Well, I think part of that is, of course, that they see some disproportionate, economics coming to them around goods that they are incredibly good at creating. And now you've got a marketplace that can make that more discoverable. But I think there's another aspect to this too, which we've just never fully solved, which is like, what's that community ethos around it? In other words, artists and their patrons for years have had a relationship. It's never really, really come online. It's never happened in a democratized way or a global way, crossing many boundaries. And often it's been isolated to people with wealth. But if you look at what's happening right now, I think you're seeing a lot of people like, I've got some good ideas, right? I can build a community around it. The economics work so I can overinvest in that community versus it just being my side hustle. And now I could potentially even give my patrons effectively ownership in what I'm doing. So the more they're contributing to the community, the more we're all actually getting benefit out of it. Maybe for the first time, instead of fearing my IP being dissolved, I might embrace fan art because it enriches my community. And if I do canonicalize that fan art, maybe everyone in the system can actually make some money off of that. And therefore, we can create kind of new ecosystems. So I think one thing to always look at is like, is there really unmet potential? Two, are things broken so that if you vertically integrated and made those services better as one entity, and then go do it. And then the third thing is that if you do that in a way that is contrary to an incumbent's business model, you probably have some runway to do it before someone tries to squash you, if they ever could. So I like to look at the world that way, if that answers your question.
And then when I'm thinking about Facebook, which is obviously not a new company, it started as a social network. Now it's much more than that. There are so many different use cases. As you mentioned, they built a community, and now commerce could be a very powerful use
Yeah.
case, but at the same time, the business is working, right? So when you join an organization that has a core business model, how do you go about setting up a product team that can be agile enough to still spin out a new initiative and make it relevant for the overall,
Yeah.
company?
Totally. I think one way is just to insulate budget and attention to that, right? We have dedicated teams on commerce at Facebook, right? These aren't just teams working centrally, these are teams within each application, right? Who effectively, each of the apps is effectively has a dedicated effort on commerce. And I think that's very important. It's not a part-time job for someone who's also working on something else, right? That's super critical. Once you start to hedge in that way, you need just everyone in it, right? And if everyone's in it, then you have a better chance of succeeding. So one way is compartmentalization. The second thing is unique goals and elevating those goals to a top level company initiative, right? And that's very important too, which is if you want people to care about it, right? And in our case, like, all the way up to Mark, right, including, senior vice presidents throughout the company, they are on the hook for commerce success, right? And so that's really important too. Like you just can't have it be an afterthought and hope it happens. It's too big an ecosystem. It might require escalations or decisions, because these are all trade-offs at the end of the day. So that's very important. And then the third thing is starting to get people who might, have, really interesting perspectives on that space that might be outside of Facebook, including people like myself, but getting fresh eyes, right, and different ways of doing things. One thing that's important in commerce, for example, you've got the demand side and the supply side, and it's hard to decouple those things. In other words, you need good products there, right? You need to be able to rank those products and get them to buyers with a good customer service experience. And you can't like sequence your way through that, right? If one piece is missing, oh, it's a really great experience, but there's no great products for me, or awesome products and a great experience, but I can't discover them, then you're going to fail. So what's really important also is incubating a group that's across product and many other functions who are moving in lockstep to create the ecosystem, create incentives for people to participate, and occasionally do things, through blood, sweat, and tears before you can effectively scale them, just to make sure that it works. And any marketplace in the world is usually bootstrapped and has like opinionation to begin with. I think that's a very important shift here. So we also have a lot of great talent coming on who's experienced that firsthand and has made it happen, in addition to people who are fantastic at scale and invention here.
I like what you said about making these goals company-wide so they are relevant. And number two is thinking about the product team truly beyond product managers and
Yeah.
engineers. So for an organization like Facebook and others you work with are famous for having strong product teams. How do you go about making sure that there is enough diversity and a representation of the customer base inside
Yeah.
your own team?
So it's interesting, and I think a lot of companies lose sight of this, but if you were to look at my calendar, it would involve a lot of client calls every week, right? So I spend time with brands, often small ones who are like up and coming on the platform. Like there's some great folks, like if you look at beauty, for example, at the higher end, you've got Sephora, but at every single level, there's like an up and coming brand that effectively is going to be that big eventually. I have no doubt that they're going to be successful. But when you talk to them, their needs are very different, right? They might be betting heavily in terms of like social media in order to get an audience out there. They might be looking for new use cases, right? A lot of them might be very special products that benefit from gifting, right? Or they might be effectively products where they're attracting youth and group buying could be a thing, right? And that might not be the thing that other folks are caring about who already have a well-known branded presence. So it's really interesting to step back and one, just spend time with customers. And I think one of the things that happens at very large companies, particularly tech companies, is the more mature they get, the more distance from the customer the average person is. So what we try to do is use our research teams and our partner facing teams to get these customers in, have roundtable discussions with them, open those discussions up to a big portfolio of the team, and particularly new leaders coming in, they will be expected effectively to meet with customers on a regular basis. But I think it's important to do that. Otherwise, you are going to get exactly what you said, which tends to be isolated, right? And much more internal than it needs to be. The second piece of that, which is, of course, like, well, a lot of this is like we spend a lot of time on analytics and we look at retention graphs, right? And we look at effectively, how many shoppers do we have over time and GMV over time? I'm a big, big believer that some of the best stories are in the anomalies and in the anecdotes of success. So what we also look at are dashboards that actually talk about what is happening with individual shops. And we all have access to a calendar of upcoming drops of new products on the platform. But we can very quickly go from what I would call, trend lines, right, to stories. And I think that's really important at this stage, which is, okay, which brands are doing well? Oh, that's interesting. Why are they doing well, right? Like, I've never personally shopped from them, but I'm curious to see why they have that trajectory and what are they doing that's so special here. Sometimes you can't just capture that in the dashboard either. You got to go follow them, on Instagram or join their Facebook group or see their live session to understand what's unique there. So we have the benefit of being both a creation platform, but also a consumption platform. But I think as we develop new forms of consumption there and like people, right? It's all about people ultimately. Like actually go see what's happening. You have that luxury of being able to do that. This isn't some deep enterprise thing where you may not actually ever understand that skill set. Probably in our world, you shop, right? You shop online, and there's probably brands that we have that are relevant for you. Go play with it, see what you think, and see if someone's doing special. Or even better, tell us if you're not getting anything special, because maybe we are underserving individual audiences accordingly.
So the same way you have a system to identify these type of brands or companies that are not Sephora yet, but that have the potential to grow fast, I want us to take a look at your product team. A lot of product managers that they're doing different things. You probably have a lot of talent in house. How can someone who is, let's say, mid-level, trying to grow faster, how do you identify certain PMs? What do they have to do in order to really raise their
Okay.
hand and kind of get more attention?
Yeah. Okay. This one thing is like a great PM understands and falls in love with the company goals or top level goals that they have. They're not trying to create new goals necessarily. They're not trying to create justification of something that doesn't fit into the company. That can happen, of course, and sometimes that's the hallmark of innovation. But one key thing is that they really understand the goals. They understand why they exist. They're willing to debate them, but they have a grip on those goals. And once they have a grip on those goals, this is equally important. They are never in love with any specific tactic, right? If something's not working, a great PM, particularly at that manager and above level, is able to say, that's not working. We really need to tweak it materially, or we need to find a new bet, right? Or we need to have some parallel bets because we're not sure what's going to work. So sometimes junior PMs fall in love with an idea, an individual tactic, and maybe that tactic is important far, and they forget about the option value of other things they can do, things that could be more scrappy or things that require more investment or require collaboration across teams, which is the most difficult one. But what you're looking for is on their head, right? Here's my goals. Here's a few different trees I can climb to get there. And they're paying attention to those trunks and the branches as they get there. Okay, does that make sense? And then the second piece of this, which I think is very important, is it doesn't mean that you're really scrappy about what you build. I think one thing that's I'm actually contrarian about is that I think the kind of like launch and iterate culture that has definitely played out at many companies I've worked at in my career is sometimes an enemy of like success. Sometimes you have to put different pieces together holistically in that first product and just really just get into the design of it. The UX will matter, right? And not cheapen all of these bets. Too many great strategies, I think, have died at companies because of poor execution. So when I say don't fall in love with the tactics, I actually mean pick a tactic, go deep in it, see if it will work, right? Do your best to make it work. Get all the support in the company to make that happen. But then if you see it's really not working because it was just a bad strategic bet, move on. But that doesn't mean be lazy about design. That doesn't mean not care about the pixels. That doesn't mean that a perfect use case will just magically iterate its way to conclusion. I think we have to learn a little bit more from different companies who might be a little bit more full featured on that. At the extreme would be Apple, right? But there's some good products that come out of that process. And then of course, you need agility once you find that fit and you need to iterate really fast, but be careful about completeness or lack of completeness getting in the way of PMF, that is something that I see a lot lately.
Let's talk about the future of product for a second. You
Yeah.
mentioned Web 3.0, you mentioned NFTs, you mentioned the creator economy. I'm excited about all of that. Obviously, we come from a place where product management wasn't really cool. Now it's so cool, right? Like there are thousands of people right now joining
We are
we
so
have
lucky right now. I know exactly.
we have role
Yeah.
models like you who are also, have a platform and are sharing knowledge, giving
Yeah.
back. So as someone who is in the weeds today, thinking about what are some of those major trends, what
Yeah.
would you say is the future of product?
So I think one thing that product needs to be more adept with rather, and adapt to is a lot of what we're trying to do with disruption right now has a heavy operational component in it as well. It's not just about aggregating demand and what our UI looks like and what our recommendation engine looks like. It might be that we need to solve things. Like we might need to, if you look at the world of commerce, what's the difference between good customer service versus not? Can be logistics. Simple as that. Is it easy to return a product, right? These things matter. But if you were to pursue that, then that has fundamental, impact on your P&L and profitability, right? So one thing that product, I think particularly like if I look at what Web 2 product is doing that might need to be more sophisticated in Web 3 is just having a deeper understanding of the economics and how things flow and how developing a great service, right, might be more costly, might merit more investment in order to make that happen. And don't be afraid of that. We do live in a world where it does appear capital is very cheap and exhaustive. So don't fear that as much, but start to get a little savvy about how you might do it. Now, I'm not saying that means like every product manager needs to think about how do I buy 50 buildings out there. There's still innovations there. WeWork is famously going to more of an asset light model where it owns less leases and is more like a franchise, but it's aggregating demand to all of those. But there's still operational components around that, like access control in the buildings and giving you effectively peace of mind that if I get this one card, I can go anywhere when I've booked it versus talking to someone at a desk all day. These are important. And then there's security aspects of that service in the real world that really, really matter. So it's not so simple, but I think one thing is understand the economics. And this also goes particularly to Web3 disruptions, right? Which is a lot of the big shifts here have to do with the economics of revenue, right, and earnings now being distributed in different ways. So it's not just enough to step back and say, whoa, the way that wallet works with that marketplace is so janky, no one will ever use it. There's some truth to that, and we need to fix it. But it also might mean a lot about like, do you understand a smart contract and do you understand why this particular resale rev share matters in this ecosystem? And what did it used to look like? So what are you making better by doing this? Like you have to have good grip, I would say, of the economics of what's going on there, because that might be what's fueling a lot of the adoption. And if you get it wrong, that also might make this a product or service that you create that only services a very small class of wealthy folks, right? If you're not able to figure out how to extend that membership aspect and the value out of that membership to a much longer tail. So I think that's pretty interesting. What this new world represents for us is the entanglement, effectively, brand new infrastructure that has so much transparency, but also has privacy and payments baked in. Super interesting. And then you put on top of that, like a transparency, an instrument, you know, there, it's fully instrumented transparency, which allows you to do really interesting things with money flow that you could never do before. And therefore, you might be able to grow the pie even bigger, but also redistribute that pie in a more fair way that incents healthy participation.
So as a PM, as I'm thinking all of this, like sounds
Yeah,
really cool and exciting, right? Like I really want to learn more about each of
yeah,
these areas that you mentioned. At the same time, right? Like you have to maintain your full-time job, your family, your friends. So what would you say are like good ways for
yeah,
a curious mind to stay up to date and kind of take advantage of those opportunities while maintaining the rest of the things?
yeah. Well, I think some of it is one, just immerse yourself, right? Just for fun. I think it's like, look, what did we do when mobile apps first came out? We downloaded a bunch of apps, right? And all of us, I hope, just critique those apps. And, I spent a lot of time every week just saying, what do I not like about the UX or not? It actually just made me a better product design collaborator as well, right? And then if you go even further in time, like you'd be looking at these crazy valuations in the .com. I did a lot of that. I was like, what's fueling this valuation? And is it real or what am I missing here? Like, what's so critical about this? And in order to understand it, sometimes you have to poke holes and you realize when you did poke those holes, the whole thing would pop. But a lot of times you'd step back and say, okay, I get what Google is, right? And I get why ads on Google now is a huge thing about revenue. But what I really understand about Google now is that there are a bunch of people who would never have that distribution for national e-commerce. And finally, here is a place where all of that demand was aggregated to find those products. So people who might have only sold in their neighborhood with flyers were now selling across the country. But you have to understand that piece of it to understand these markets at some level. So one way to look at this is just to start to play a little bit. Personally, I've collected a few lower price NFTs that I think are cool communities, right? If I don't get the pre-mint, then I just don't do it. I'm not, going to spend a lot of money on this right now. And that's just my own conservatism. Everyone's got their line. But by joining these communities, I'm seeing how do they get people excited about this? Great. How do they use Discord to have these conversations? What are the extensions to Discord, like things like rarity that are particularly important in this ecosystem? How are the marketplaces reflecting that community activity? My lens is that they're not, for example. Like I don't see any community signal inside the average NFT marketplace right now. But shouldn't it be? Because that might be the reason I'm buying in this asset is not just the art, which I appreciate, but it's the fact that that art is going to be about real world activities and digital activities in the future. So it's my membership to a really interesting community. But that doesn't show up in a lot of these things. So I start to step back and I just get a feeling of this. One exercise I think great product managers should also go through is every once in a while ask yourself, how would I rebuild what I worked on before in this new world? So I'm asking myself that a lot, like around the lens of YouTube, right? If I think about a lot of things we did on YouTube, I think we were all very proud and continue to be proud about the income that was translated over to creators through this ecosystem. But I look at the NFT world and I'm like, this is interesting. How would we have, like, if YouTube was born again and was just built by creators who had ownership and stake in the community, what might they do differently? Would they have helped with our growth? Probably. But would they also potentially have started to explore different revenue models faster than we did? Like, for a good example, a lot of YouTube, if you have a huge amount of subscribers, your advertising revenue is going to be good because ads is a reach game for most people. But if you were one of these creators who had ownership, maybe you would have voted to say, hey, I need private subscription channels for more niche things, basically what Substack and other things represent now. Why do I need that? It's because I need to get the most value out of my smaller fan base. But because I see it creates such high value advice or content for them, that model works better for me. But for us, it was largely about ads, right? And we did play with subscriptions, et cetera, but we didn't play with it as though it was existential to win in that game, right, during my era. Whereas now, I think you could see with certain creators on the platform, they're going to find a way to make it work, and they have with the ecosystem, but that could be a different way of looking at it. I also think about small things. What would I do with, like, we spent a lot of time trying to figure out how to unblock the ability for small creators to sing cover songs and keep them on the platform and monetize them. I can imagine a world with NFTs where those rights are effectively atomized into ownership. And the result of that is that it would be much easier to see up front, okay, in the blockchain, it says that if I cover that song, I can make this money in this contract. And I've got reliability that will happen. We never had that reliability on YouTube. It could just get taken down because someone changed their mind, or the licensing would have to be renewed, and who knows what that would happen over time. But I could see a world where these new structures will increase the pie and give a lot more people benefit around that, but give them transparency and reliability of it. So that's one advice I give to people is just step back. Once you learn a little bit about the ecosystem by playing around, go back and reinvent an app into that new world and see if something comes out of it. Sometimes it won't, but if it does, I think that's the proof that you've actually grokked what's going on.
Love that, because I think there is something magical about having skin in the game. And that means, as you said, like buying something,
Yeah.
it could be an NFT, might be building something with your own hands, right? These days, there's no excuse to not be able to build an app or a mobile
Right.
or whatever. Like the barrier of entry is so low that I think that's the
Yeah.
beautiful thing. If you are curious enough, you don't need a master's degree or spend tons of time to understand
Yep.
enough to decide if you want to take that next step or not.
Absolutely. And there's so much tooling in place. Some of it's very immature, but there's so much engineering excitement around this world right now that you're getting some of the greatest minds build tools. You're getting some of the greatest minds really jump in and make it easier for others. Like I wrote my first, contract recently, right? And it, it took a little bit while to like dust off, right, the mind and get back into this world. But the fact of seeing it and following across the chains to actually see it transact and learning how to test that with the right harness, I mean, it was so much fun. It's Candyland if you appreciate that type of stuff. Now, I'm not saying everyone needs to code everything here. I think you need to ask yourself, which is, there's a new class of folks who are finally, I think, going to be even have a closer marriage with technology, and that's all these artists and creators out there. So if you're a fan of anything out there, which we all are, you're probably going to see that incarnation in its space, whether it's sports, whether it's pure art, right? Whether it's like literature, gaming, renditions or artifacts based on all of those things, and all of them becoming a melting pot. You're in for a treat over the next few years. So don't be afraid to jump in because it's also not going to feel like boring work. You're just going to have fun.
I agree. I think back in the day, Web 1 or Web 2, the
Yeah.
only way to contribute to the web was through code. Now there's so many other ways you can contribute to the web.
Yeah.
Well, Shiva, it's been a pleasure to learn from you. Thank you so much for your time and giving us a peek into the future.
Yeah, it's my pleasure and honor to be here. I'm just lucky to have this job. And, like I said, I did not know what product was until maybe I was doing it for 8 years. And so I got to a late start. For all of you, thanks for coming. And I think what's really important is there couldn't be a better time to be in this discipline. I'm very proud of it. But a lot of cool skills that are coming together right now, design, psychology, economics. If you have a passion for any of those things right now, you can be a great PM. So good luck.